So, know how sometimes I end up doing what I generally call a feature story? Well, this script has one. It will be our closer for the show, and since I was aiming for a short, and it's about 2,000 words long, guess this will be sort of a weird show. Oh, and I just want to say, I bring up the File 770 letter. File 770 is a sci-fi fantasy magazine that's been running since 1970 something, and they had an open pro AI letter. I reference it. There's going to be a link in the description. I don't focus on it too much because I might be working on a larger video essay referencing it, plus that Larian vid. I hopefully will have that up later this week, as well as referencing this featured story, because that was the only way that I managed to get this to feel short and reasonable enough, was by committing to doing something longer elsewhere. Sorry. I don't love covering generative AI, which this whole feature story is kind of fixated on, but it's important and it was everywhere this week. Oh, also, have you ever heard of the Streisand effect? I mean, you're on the internet, so I kind of assume you probably have, but if not, you might want to look it up because, like, 3 stories this week only exist because of it. Whoa! And welcome to Muttday Morning News. I'm the titular Mutt Fen. Now let's get to some news. I can't decide if I'm going to try and blow through this one for length or just because it's stupid. Trump illegally changed the name of the Kennedy Center, claiming to add his own name in a unanimous vote back on the 18th. That was a lie, obviously, by the way. It wasn't unanimous. Ohio Representative Joyce Beatty was muted and prevented from voicing her dissent. Also, again, illegal and, like, against the charters of the Kennedy Center itself. Whatever, who's counting those anymore? Actually, you know what? I'm renaming this section to "The Dictator of My Country is a Doddering Old Fool" and doing a rapid-fire round instead. On the 23rd, the Trump administration put out a video of Santa joining ICE, as well as a Truth Social post from the Orange Grinch himself, where he rambled about leaving the presidency to host full-time because he hosted the Kennedy Center Awards that evening. It was weird. Also on the 23rd, well, actually constantly in the last week, the White House has been citing national security concerns as an excuse for everything from needing to hide the details of the East Wing demolition fund and the supposed ballroom to maybe eventually replace it, to why they simply must kill offshore wind power generation. If you hadn't heard that one, the administration is claiming that offshore wind power generation is a national security risk because it provides radar cover for theoretical international RC drone attacks. And that's before we even get to Howard Lutnick. Trump's Secretary of Commerce went on multiple interviews, even with softball-ass Fox, failing to defend Trump's claim that he's reducing drug costs by 600%. For those who also hate percentages like I do, for that to be the case, we'd be getting paid for picking up our prescriptions instead of, paying for them. Specifically, we'd be getting paid 5 times what we had been paying for them. Since that's not happening, no, the price has not decreased by 600%. Then on Christmas Eve, Trump got real weird on the C-SPAN Santa tracker. It was really clearly not all there, but it got extra uncomfortable, especially with the recent Epstein File releases, which, through poor redactions, implicate him in myriad child sexual abuse crimes. So it made the bits where children called in a little extra uncomfortable, between the kids specifically asking for not coal, to which he promised them clean, beautiful coal, or maybe the one where he called a child beautiful and cute before asking how old she was, and she said she was 8. Yeah, I can't decide between overwhelming chill running up my spine because that's horrifying, or we're headed for like a depression. Cool. On Christmas, the viewership numbers of the Kennedy Center honors Trump hosted went up, and surprising no one with a working brain, they were 35% lower than the previous year. Apparently, people didn't like the idea of watching a fascist jerk off for a few hours. And now the Trump White House is threatening to sue artists for refusing to caper for Trump's amusement. Apparently, censorship now means refusing to perform at the whims of a mad king, or so says the mad king. Oh, and Trump pushed a bunch of overt Christian nationalism stuff on X because separation of church and state is bullshit now. Unless that church isn't an evangelical preaching the prosperity gospel or quiverful accelerationism, but I guess that's also not really a surprise. Plus, they also barred a bunch of UN commissioners from entering the US. Well, one of them actually lives here, so that's a little extra fucky. They're trying to deport him for un-American social media connections, which is to say, they're commissioners who, among other things, previously worked to establish the EU Commission, which recently fined Elon Musk $140 million and is threatening to do the same to many other USian social networks operating in the EU while spreading false information, which is against the new EU Commission. I wanted to include something about the redactions in that rapid fire, but this is a little bit too important to do just that. So first, the Trump White House broke the law Trump himself signed, like, in November by not releasing all the Epstein files. That's pretty cut and dry. Like, they're trying to drip feed them in a way which seems kind of designed to reinforce and perpetuate the Streisand effect, especially if Trump and everyone in them keeps screaming about how they're not a big deal. The rub is, they obviously massively over-redacted them. Perfect example right here. This redaction was not protecting a victim, but rather, as you can now see, hiding more of Epstein's admitted crimes. And then, of course, there's the fact that I just showed you the unredacted version of this because these idiots redacted many, though not all, of the released files with the free version of Adobe Acrobat. Because Doge and Elon Musk killed the $4 million contract that enabled government agencies to use it to actually be able to redact things with it instead of just saving the text still in a PDF under a black bar that you can still select the text under it. Additionally, and this is why I will not be using many images from the files, many of Epstein and Maxwell's victims, including some who'd thus far managed to go intentionally unnamed, were not redacted. I need to stress this. The Trump administration, who pushed for the release of the Epstein files, broke the law by not doing so, then dropped some with redactions to protect those adults who sexually abused children, including a dead man, but not the victims, before revealing they had in fact not redacted most information because of a cost-cutting measure by a team who allegedly cost the US taxpayers $500 billion in order to save $4 million. I covered this a bit last week, but Mel Curth, the graduate student who was teaching at the University of Oklahoma, had, mere months ago, been awarded by the school for excellence in teaching, has been removed from her position. Baselessly, obviously. We've gone over Fulnecky's absolutely piss essay multiple times. But I talked about that last week. This week, I'm here to tell you, per her lawyer, Mel Curth does not have a GoFundMe. Her attorney, Brittany, asks that anyone who sees any please report them as fraudulent and let her know about them as well. Because, yeah, no, Mel Curth is not running any of these GoFundMes. These are all scammers. Please report them. So here's that second Streisand effect story. Bari Weiss spiked a 60-minute special on CECOT, the El Salvadorian torture camp Trump sent Americans to be tortured to death in. It was intended to air on the 21st, and the kill order was given less than 48 hours before airtime. I briefly mentioned it last week. I think I described it as, and then Bari fucking Weiss walked up to drive the final nail into the journalistic coffin as I was writing this story last night, before lighting it on fire to make 1200% sure it was really, really dead. Well, she's since spent the following week knuckling down and reaffirming her buck-wild belief it wasn't ready to air, specifically because they hadn't received a comment from the Trump administration. Actually, she started trying to say it was specifically Stephen Miller whose comment it desperately needed. Why? Because in the 60-minute segment, it's made clear CNN did ask the administration for comment, and they gave one.
The Department of Homeland Security declined our request for an interview and referred all questions about CECOT to El Salvador. The government there did not respond to our request.
I say this because, of course it leaked. It wasn't even really a leak. Weiss tried to spike the episode with almost no warning. So close to airtime, it had already been sent off to international distributors like Global TV. And since the spiking was such big news, when one dude realized he could play it on his TV through the Global TV streaming app, routed through a Canadian VPN, and record it on his phone, he did. That was shared on Blue Sky, then uploaded to YouTube, and another dude managed to get a clean direct line recording after circumventing the stream's DRM. The segment can't really be found on YouTube anymore, either the phone version or the clean cut. Most of the uploads were taken down within an hour, and now, well, it's in YouTube's system, so I don't even dare use many clips from it. It is, however, up on archive.org, and I encourage you all to watch it, if for no other reason than because the US government didn't want you to. As always, link in the description. So, originally there was only one story for Houndsbite, but now I actually have two of them, so hey! The other one's not necessarily good. This one's good, though. This one's good and kind of cool. We all know lithium-ion batteries have been kind of a game changer in the realms of power storage, but basically all of humanity's previous power storage attempts, it's pretty dangerous. If you look back at the history of human battery developments, it's basically just, what is the most caustic material we know of, shove it in a jar, or whatever the most pressurized tube we can make is, and that's it. Lithium is that. If the thing was less caustic, but more explosive when it meets water, like even as little as is free-floating in the air at times. A new development in sodium-ion batteries doesn't really fix the potentially explosive water issue, but does help with lithium's other key problem. It's ridiculously rare, like really rare, and we've kind of already dug up most of the reasonably accessible stuff, so it's both rare and expensive, to say nothing of the fact that it's also almost always mined by exploited workers in the global south. Sodium-ion batteries are doing this fun thing, though, where they keep making huge breakthroughs in storage capacity. They're playing with different molecular additions so as to develop an alloy capable of storing, well, more power more efficiently and densely. But unlike the engineers who were originally developing lithium-ion batteries, the folks working on sodium batteries don't have to guess as much. They're basically making huge leaps and bounds because a lot of the lithium research is transferable to their work with sodium. So the most recent battery attempt, a sodium vanadium battery, was able to store nearly 15% more energy than the previous sodium alloy. Still not meeting up with lithium, but it's advancing so much faster than lithium ever did. I'm not saying we're really close to having No Man's Sky sodium batteries, but This was so on the nose. When I ran into it Sunday night, I had to include it. There was no conscious thought. I just had to. Because what do you mean there's a high-end super premium security company called Sauron? Why do the tech gentry keep naming things after shit from Lord of the Rings? And why are they so bad at it? I get that they were specifically thinking about the all-seeing eye of Sauron. But that's not better. How do you not get that's worse? It's the eye of the Dark Lord Sauron. That's kind of inextricable, but also it's literally an all-seeing eye. Why would you think that's a good thing? Don't build the Torment Nexus from the novel. Don't build the Torment Nexus. How many times do we have to go over this? Needless to say, after launching a year ago, with backing from Flock and Palantir, promising AI-driven systems and advanced sensor suites, and live supervision by ex-cops and military 24/7. They're not in the news for some kind of new security world-shattering development. No, it's because they have a new CEO, whose last 9 years were spent as the chief product officer at Sonos, a Bluetooth speaker company, which he compares as very similar. Also probably explains why he was so open with TechCrunch about how Sauron is still in the development phase. And okay, this next quote from the new CEO, Maxime Max Bouvant-Merlin, hurts me because the first sentence of it says the same thing, like 3 different ways. I think in an attempt to sound smart, but it mostly just makes him sound like an LLM. And the rest of the sentence is just repeating the same thought anyway. Well, sentence quote. You'll see a phased approach when we get our solution to market as a stepping stone. All the different components, our concierge service, our AI software running on servers, our smart cameras, our building blocks coming together in a plan we just put in place very recently. Okay, just 1, where else would your AI software run? 2, is this not the plan you hatched and launched with in 2024? Like December of 2024. Like I said, this man speaks like a generative AI, and I find that somehow more horrifying than management standard English, the dialect of English unique to corporate executives. You named your extra premium security company after the fucking Dark Lord of Middle-earth. I'm sorry, I had to reiterate that. Why? Why? And since these are all hypothetical questions I don't really expect that they'll answer, maybe they will and I'd really like them to, because no one ever asks this important one. 5, since these aren't actually about protecting wealthy clients from normal crime, as that has actually steadily been dropping for years, if not decades, the goal of this super premium security is obviously to make rich people feel more protected from the masses. If the angry prole hordes come beating down the doors to your super premium clients' houses, what exactly is the plan? Further, how do you guarantee the ex-cops and military boys you hired have not joined with the proletariat army? I mean, besides the fact that all cops are bastards, but still, I feel like these are important questions. Apparently, not content with their attempt to kill trans children, which 19 states, namely California, Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, Illinois, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, New Jersey, New Mexico, New York, Oregon, Rhode Island, Vermont, Washington, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, as well as the District of Columbia, have sued to block the administration. Wait, hang on. This story isn't about that. Right. This is about that New York Post article. Sorry. I read weird, absurd thing about autism, and I immediately assumed it was a thing related to brainworm Bobby Kennedy. But then I actually read the New York Post article. Weird, I know. Mostly so that I could find the places that they were citing. Yeah, stopped clock, write twice a day and all that. Though, yes, the Post is also a trash tabloid that's mostly just regurgitating the study here very badly and trying to imply some eugenic-y shit about it because it's still the Post. The dumbest thing is that the study's findings are something almost anyone with ADHD or autism can tell you already. We're statistically more likely to have a nice ass. The headline being shared around is clearly trying to imply it's like a symptom, but it's actually a side effect. Both ADHD and autism come with issues socializing, meaning that a lot of us spend more time sitting, reading, gaming, whatever, which of course the Post implies, well, tries to imply, is an issue with us rather than an effect of the way neurotypicals treat us, but like I said, still the Post. Both ADHD and autism also tend to be comorbid with connective tissue disorders, which the Post does not mention, but is kind of key for some of this. But they did bring up some of our common sensory-seeking activities, specifically the way that many ADHD and autistic folk will do toe walking or walking on the balls of their feet, which effectively really aggressively tightens your lower back and hip flexors, almost exactly the same way wearing heels does. I wonder if that will imply or come up later. All those things together means those of us with ADHD or autism, God forbid both, are much more likely to have what's called an anterior pelvic tilt, where the front of the pelvis tilts more upward, causing a more defined gut and butt. So, for those of you who aren't as deep in the weeds about what puberty actually does to your bodies, what we're discussing with this study is basically that they found that autistic or ADHD boys, they very specifically mostly tested boys because it's more frequently diagnosed in boys. Not that it more frequently exists, it's just American healthcare is, well, most healthcare is male assumptive, okay? What we're talking about is those specific boys having a 4.5 degree more significant tilt than boys and girls, since there isn't a huge differentiation in gender before puberty, than their peers. The tilt tends to rest close to 4 or 5 degrees. But once puberty hits, those with a primarily estrogen-based system, and I am using this phrasing specifically because, yes, adult trans folks taking hormone replacements often see changes in their pelvic rotation to match their new endocrine environments, tend to have at least 2 degrees, sometimes closer to 4, more anterior pelvic rotation tilt than men or those with a testosterone-based endocrine system. Specifically, estrogen tends to lead to a 10 to 12 degree tilt, while contemporaries with a testosterone-based system tend to settle around 8 to 10 degrees. If you've ever wondered why some trans girls lose a bit of height, seem to get asses out of nowhere, and or have a bit of a tummy out of nowhere, this is one reason. Everything I just listed is also affected by HRT in like 3 other ways as well. I just want to make that part very clear too. I'm just going to set all of that information down in front of y'all, plus the tidbit that in cis women, the anterior pelvic rotation is seen as a possible evolutionary development to better facilitate birthing, then back away very quickly before anyone thinks I'm implying anything at all by pointing out the data correlations this study's authors also never acknowledged. Do with that information what you will. All I'm saying is, sounds like the story my mother loves to tell about how she should have known I was trans at 8 when she caught me running out the door in shorts and had to think to herself, oh no, my son has a girl butt. She was also just confirming I'm as autistically ADHD as my ass is fat, I suppose. Who's ready for probably one of the stranger pet plays I've ever personally done? So I came stomping downstairs Saturday morning, confused as hell over one of my increasingly regular encounters with Tumblr, and demanded Jules explain why I was seeing everyone losing their minds about a goat falling over. Well, a giant 3-story wicker goat, but still a goat. Before I got an answer, she demanded I send her the video of the goat falling over. Fox had not yet been on Tumblr that morning, so now I'm here to share with you the weird story of the Gävle Goat. Apparently, every Yule since 1966, the nearly 80,000 person city of Gävle assembles a goat of straw and sticks to celebrate the season, and most years, it burns to the fucking ground! It's not supposed to! In truth, it's actually illegal to burn it. But of the 60 goats since 1966, 43 have been destroyed before... I guess they just disassemble them after New Year's if they survive, which actually seems more anticlimactic. Oh, also there's a second goat assembled by a university in town, which is less likely to burn, but not likely, and is often visible behind or around the Gävle Goat. Unfortunately, not in this image. There's a whole weirdly detailed wiki article on the goat and its survival, link in the description, but key events, or at least the ones I find the funniest. Well, okay, first of all, there's just a lot of fire. Just a lot of fire. Plus, 1 year, some dude just stole it pretty early on. 1 year, it managed to burn down during a blizzard? Once they set up cameras, but one set of them were hacked, and the goat burned one night, specifically while the guards were hiding out from below 0 Celsius temperatures. I don't blame them personally. Another year, they covered it in water so it would form a protective ice layer, but unlike the year it burned down during a blizzard, that winter was particularly mild, so the ice just melted and the goat burned. Heck, in 2012, the goat, which had an official Twitter account, tweeted at 23:46, an hour after the fire department had declared the goat fireproofed, feeling good. By 23:56, it had burned to cinders. Well, this year it was blown over by a strong wind and has been declared destroyed. I do still think my favorite goat end to read about was 2023. While the wiki didn't consider the goat destroyed, I'd argue slowly being stripped of straw by hungry jackdaws should count. I, for one, enjoy the Tarkov's weird update schedule often places the majority of their Christmas event well after the day itself. This year, the update landed on the 23rd, which I guess means from the 26th on, Santa is celebrating a vacation from toy making by giving the scavs of Tarkov free mayonnaise and 9mm rounds. I bring it up because, well, one, it's fun, and two, because it means suddenly the most common phrase in my Discord server is now, "Damn it, I accidentally shot Santa." Maybe it's just that being a trans girl who enjoys Tarkov in spite of the way 80% of it's vocal. I know they're not the majority, they're an extremely vocal minority, want me, and everyone like me, dead. It's just kind of nice to know that there's at least one thing Tarkov players don't want to shoot or kill, even if that thing is Santa. I just have to ignore that it's due to a unavoidable reputation penalty incurred for shooting his bowl full of jelly, which can't be circumvented by saying, "I was scared he'd trans my gender." Wait, wasn't this supposed to be a positive story? Don't bother with the new dumbbell item for value. Apparently it's worth, like, not even 60k and is ridiculously heavy. That was useful information. Okay, and now we get to the feature story. When I started this, I sort of expected it to be a quick stopover story. And then it kept getting dumber. My writing process for this whole story is basically, so this is how someone becomes a video essayist, crystallized into a singular point of madness. I heard there was some kind of kerfuffle around the rules for the 2025 Nebulas, the literary awards by the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Association, or the SFWA. I knew the rules had been published, then updated later the same day. I knew it had something to do with generative AI use, and given that's one of my personal bugaboos, I kept my ear to the ground. I heard something about Raytheon, something about Friends on the Board. I also heard well-respected romance writer and lawyer Courtney Milan weighed in for some reason, and I heard that File 770, a sci-fi and fantasy, fanzine that's been running since 1978, had also piped in. So with all the rumors and actual sources to dig through, I figured it would be a fun, distracting story. And I was right about the distracting part. I'm not so sure about the fun. Now I'm convinced the author at the core of this is either a reactionary cloaking herself in the banner of idiocy, so basically a 2025 Democrat, or she's so willingly and intentionally ignorant as to be a functionally malicious actor, though I'm even more horrified by those who bend over backwards to enable those like her, so-called writers who've seem to despise the oh-so-vulgar act of birthing malformed thoughts upon paper so the next generations of still-so-vulgar creation may yet improve. Yeah, I was feeling poetic when I wrote that bit. But I stand by the point. Writing. All creative acts, really, are about learning to use and utilize a set of tools to create something external, something that is, in some small way, a piece of us, torn away from the whole so that it might be shared. Yes, at a certain point, the realities of commercialism and capitalism must also be confronted in all creative endeavors, but so many players in this story are shooting themselves in the foot before the race starts while staring down their unwounded competitors with a shit-eating grin worthy of Elonguous Muskrat himself. So what actually happened? Okay, on December 19th at 10:30 a.m. MST, the SFWA published their rules for the 2025 Nebulas. At issue were two specific lines. Works that are wholly written using generative large language model LLM tools are not eligible. Works that use LLMs at any point during the writing process must disclose this upon acceptance of nomination, and the nature of the technology's use will be made clear to the voters on the final ballot. So, during the edit, I forgot that while the new corrected rules were on screen, I never actually read them. So, really quickly, the updated rules, after two different surveys went out to authors about them, were updated from that whole wholly written with AI is the only way to get blocked to new text. Works that are written either wholly or partially by generative large language model LLM tools are not eligible. Additionally, that secondary text line, works that used LLMs at any point during the writing process must disclose this upon acceptance of the nomination, and those works will be disqualified. Turns out, allegedly, this particular phrasing, specifically that bit about wholly written, was used because Mary Robinette Kowal, of accepting Raytheon sponsorships for the 2021 WorldCom fame, would have had her 2025 book, The Martian Contingency, disqualified if LLM use was outright banned. If you don't recall the 2021 WorldCon disaster, let me just remind you, because it's rather important background on Miss Kowal's character. First up, there was obviously COVID. Then the original hotel went bankrupt because of COVID. Then the executive board kept stepping on rakes, including inviting Tony Weisskopf, an editor for Baen Books, who'd been, among many others, using Baen Books forums to foment political violence, seeking to emulate an attempt at January 6th, because I guess we just need more coups? Yeah, she got disinvited. Most of the executive board resigned after that, and Mary Robinette Kowal took over. Got that Raytheon sponsorship. Oh, and she hired a Christian choir from Duke Ellington School of the Arts for the opening ceremony. The Christian part, that was a surprise to everyone but Kowal, who were welcomed to the premier science fiction and fantasy literary convention for the world. That's the whole thing about Worldcon. That's why the next year it was supposed to be in China. With gospel and Christmas music. Let's just say the surprisingly not all that Christian bunch weren't terribly enthused, and many pointed out it violated Worldcon's own inclusivity rules. Kowal never made a comment on that one, though she did apologize for the Raytheon thing, and promised, in a magnificently unfalsifiable way, to donate the same amount of money to an undisclosed charity, as well as donating some herself. The last fun fact about the disaster that was the Worldcon she ran, it really should not have been run at all, since, December 2021, COVID vaccines were only freshly out, and of questionable use against the then much more prevalent Omicron variant. Additionally, kids weren't allowed to get the vaccines at that point. So did she seriously risk an entire school choir like that for the opening ceremony of the con? That's just a thing that I feel like folks don't bring up a lot. Were they not present physically? I can't find video of this because Worldcon's websites are shit. So maybe they were videoing in? It's the only thing I can hope for here. Needless to say, she's been heavily involved with other past Worldcons too. She even had her membership revoked from one of those. She was serving alcohol at a panel that was not, certified to serve alcohol. She's also bounced around committees and boards throughout the SFWA over the years, including serving as the president in 2019. So saying she has friends on the executive team, it's putting it rather mildly. I'd also say she has a rather storied history of making remarkably poor decisions and, as we can see, not taking personal responsibility for them, which feeds rather directly into this Gen AI thing. See, I was trying to find the original speculation that her book was the reason for the original rule, but it's her own comments which led to that speculation. She kept bringing up how she was in favor of the updated rules before making it clear she preferred the previous ones, and then admitting that the new rules specifically disqualified her book and regretted the loss of a tool, as though, despite her other claims, it hadn't only been used a single time in 2022. Given what she said, it also was used more than a single time. We'll get to that. So, well, like I said, that's what she said in her cleaned up version of the story. She presented in response to Courtney Milan's thread, where she was actually addressing the ideology of literary creation, not specific to the Nebula Awards, though, yeah, like most people who do creative works, Courtney Milan's whole thing was generative AI is antithesis to all we do and needs to be burned with fire, which for some reason Quell thought she was in agreement with, which she's not. Seriously, what is it with writers getting into Courtney Milan's replies to make their cases? It never goes well for them. This same thing happened with the fucking Omegaverse lawsuit back in 2019. Trouble is, I went looking and found where she actually mentioned using LLMs, not in this cleaned up thread, but it was totally fine because it was back in 2022. But also, it was such a hot button issue so quickly, in 2022, that she just had to hide it, never brought it up. And okay, look, her story has a bunch of holes constantly, and she's making them herself. Ones I could probably fill in by buying her book, but I have neither the time, the money, nor the inclination to do so. So I'll merely go off of her public statements, which are that in Marie Robinette Kowal's 2025 book, The Martian Contingency, the fourth book in a series of alternate history 1960s and 70s sci-fi novels she's been writing since 2012, called, seriously, it's called The Lady Astronaut. Sorry, this is both boring and annoying to refer to. A series name should be something that works as a collective noun, though good on her for not including the in the series name, at least. That's my bare minimum. The name worked when it was a 21-page short in 2012 called The Lady Astronaut of Mars, because it was just that, a 21-page short. As for the title for a now 4-part series of prequels to that short, it just feels lazy, if not kind of insulting, given that there are actually plenty of women astronauts. One of them even tried to commit a really impressive, if deeply fucked up, murder plan, so hey. But whatever. According to Quell's cleaned up tale, she used an unnamed generative AI to translate the acronyms in a manual and present them like a transcript. So, 1, I've personally never seen a technical manual not explain what an acronym stands for. We'll have an explanation for why soon, don't worry. 2, she had a paid expert and clearly wasn't working within a harsh deadline since she checked with him later. Earlier, she told someone else that in 2022, she'd used an LLM to find the correct page in a 400-page flight manual for a line of jargon. That's not what LLMs do. She generated a 400-page flight manual instead of referencing a real one where she could have just used Control F. Then, if her later statement is to be believed, also had the LLM explain the acronyms from its own generated text. I don't even have a conclusion to that bit. She knows both these statements are still up, right? These were taken this morning. This is what she claims she was referring to as needing help with the Mars stuff, by the way. 4, in the same thread, she actually admitted to using ChatGPT specifically to generate New York Times articles. Every chapter in the Lady Astronaut books apparently starts with an in-universe news article, which Koal formats using an existing article, often a New York Times piece. Personally, that sounds annoying as hell, and she says so herself. But that's only because she was, from the beginning, looking for a newspaper article to copy and adjust to fit her needs, straddling a blurry line of plagiarism and copyright infringement, and did that instead of creating a template the same way every newspaper ever does, to just insert her desired text into, in a series she has been writing since 2012. Koal claims only 2 of the articles that open chapters in the Martian contingency were generated by ChatGPT, but she also didn't bring that up in her cleaned up story. So who's to really say? This skeet is literally, there are literal words in literal text that did not start with me. 5, this is the 4th book in this series. How do you not have flight manuals you're referencing as like a local file such that you're generating a new 400-page one on the 5th book? How have you not developed a template for the article inserts instead of weirdly editing existing ones? How are you getting confused by acronyms in reference material for a series you've been writing for 13 years? 6, no, I did not think this counting bit through, but while I'm here, why is it cis white ladies like the Swords and Sapphics twits, as well as Miss Koal, keep bringing up how they could have just lied? We know everyone could lie all the time. Most of us just don't, because we're proud of our work and the research that goes into it. I need them to understand and figure out why they don't get that bringing up you could have lied about your race in the Swords and Sapphics case or LLM use merely connotes that you considered doing just that. It doesn't exonerate you. 7. It's key she and others like Aaron Underwood in the File 770 letter keep trying to make this about incidental use or uses outside an author's control, such as by a publisher, when that's not the issue here. She did it. She said she did it. Repeatedly, also weirdly and inconsistently, but she said outright parts of her book were written by an LLM and other aspects were influenced by using one for research purposes. Again, for referencing something she theoretically has been using for 13 years. 8. She keeps doing the 2022 was a different time thing, but no, LLMs being built on stolen data was known, in some circles, in 2021. Coincidentally, when Sandfall, the Claire Obscure devs, also tried making this same excuse, only the environmental and, well, mental threats these Azathoth Ex Machina pose were not known as openly in 2021 and 2022. And if either of their stories held any water, they wouldn't have hidden the generative AI use then or now. I need to stress this enough. I don't think I can stress this enough. One of the key issues is repeatedly hiding the generative AI use or, not coming forward with it back in 2022. 9. She and others have this weird fixation on the number of words not written by her, as though this is some sort of equation that can be balanced. Like, had she thesaurused every word in one of the articles ChatGPT had generated for her, she didn't work with generative slop? I think this is very much my read, so grain of salt. That's why she's had this thing about it's only 50 non-sequential words. I think she's saying that to explain without explaining how heavily she interprets the edited articles as being her own words instead of the generative AIs. Like I said, it doesn't make a ton of sense, and she keeps trying to not bring that part up further, so. 10. There is a legitimate discussion to be had about when the line is crossed into made with generative AI in a world where many software companies are bundling it in with everything. Usually it's still mostly optional, but it is bundled in with everything, yes. But that's not the discussion here. The second you say the phrase, I asked ChatGPT, you're made with regurgitative AI. You've gone to the predictive keyboard of Sam Altman, Elon Musk, or Mark Zuckerberg and replaced an honest act of creation with slop. Yeah, I scripted the outro this time, mostly because I wanted to guarantee I finished on that slop line, but also because I wanted to tell you to read Anthony Moser's only post. I'm an AI hater over on his GitHub blog thing. I don't know how GitHub works. I'm not going to pretend. There's a specific excerpt that's been floating around. Heck, I used it during this show. But you should read the whole thing, and not just because I'm going to be referencing it again in that video essay I threatened. We could all use a bit more human creativity in our lives lately to remind us, as we turn our backs on a year of darkness and look forward to a year promising pretty much the same, that it's the connections between us, the moments we make with each other, with a good story, with a good puzzle, with ourselves. Those are what life should be about, just as surely as we must survive, we must also work towards a world worth living and thriving in. Don't let survival harden you to living and enjoying life. Yes, I am saying this at least in some part for myself. I'll see you all in the new year. I've been doing this show for 20 weeks straight. We're at 21, despite there being 3 double Muttday weeks, because I only let some of them actually increment the count. It's been a weird show, okay? So I'm taking next Monday, the 5th, off, plus I'm going to a party on the 4th. Please, news cycle, don't make me regret this. We both know it will, but whatever. Streams are going to be up in the air this week, mostly because last week was Christmas, and at the last second, I decided Jules and I needed some festivity in our lives, so I did not get any of my editing done. So I'll be trying to do that this week while still streaming a bit. 10th Tech Priest gifted me the Night Rain DLC, so I need to start working on that. Plus I have some ideas I've been toying with for regular content, writing things in the new year. Oh, and I need to post that final holiday poem that I didn't last year. That'll probably go up on the 30th, I think, over at fen.gay. Oh yeah, and a reminder that everything that I do is brought to you by viewers like you who support over on Twitch, here on YouTube, patreon.com/fen, and coffee.com/fen. Yeah. I hope everyone has a good day, night, time zone, and also just a good new year. Like, I know I said there that I said it for myself too, but like, celebrating feels weird when everything kind of sucks, but if you don't find things to celebrate, then you end up not actually living, just surviving, and that will break you just as surely, if slowly, as anything else. So, yeah, that was a cheery thing to end on, wasn't it? I'm sorry, I'm just like this.